Good day guys, it's Bruce, I'm a noob, and today we're going to do a review of Tamiya's Panzerkampfwagen for Ausführung H, and this is the early H. So it's very early production when they transitioned from the G over to the H, and in fact it's so early that, as we'll see, this kit still has a lot of features of a G, and this has generated some confusion in some of the modeling groups I belong to on Facebook, and specifically the Panzer IV reference group. I want to give a big shout out to Craig Ellis, author of Panzerkampfwagen IV on the Battlefield Volumes 1 and 2, and the other guys on the group there, because we debated this one for quite a while. I'm going to put up a couple of reference pictures. This is for my Market Garden 74th anniversary group build diorama. And in fact, as it turns out conveniently, this exact model of Panzer IV-H was actually seen in a couple of relatively well-known pictures if you follow the Battle of Market Garden and do any research into that battle. And so there was a Kampfgruppe, Panzerkompanie Mielke, I believe it's how it's pronounced, M-I-E-L-K-E, one of the hastily assembled units that was put together to try to counterattack against the British Paras holding the bridge. And as you'll see in the photos, they had some Panzer IVs. They wound up getting knocked out. The one in the photo actually got taken out by two shots to the lower glacis from a British Para 6-pounder anti-tank gun positioned just on the other side of the bridge along the roadway that it was advancing up. And famously, during the battle, or just after, when the city was bombed, there's a gantry, a pipe gantry from a dairy. Actually, this was an industrial part of town, collapsed on the back of this Panzer IV, and it was stuck there until the British liberated the city a few months later. And the British towed it out and took a bunch of pictures of it. And so there's several different photos of this specific tank that don't at first appear to be the same tank because, first of all, it's in different positions, some with the Scherzen, some without the Scherzen. But if you look at enough of the common features between them, it actually turns out this is probably the same tank. So I'm going to try to model this tank when I do build it as part of this diorama for the Market Garden group build, before it was knocked out by the 6-pounder, and it's advancing west down the road towards the British positions. And it may be stretching things a little bit. I'll have my little Red Devils there with the Piat and everything getting ready to take it out. But yeah, it's you know, going to try to, you know, use a bit of dramatic license, I guess, but model the diorama after a real vehicle, real events on the ground. So let's take a look inside the box. Usual very nice Tamiya box art, or Tamiya. So we'll get the instructions out and we'll take a look through those. So the usual write-up here, and this actually talks about this particular iteration of the Panzer IV-H, the very early ones. And again, thanks to Craig Ellis and some of the other guys in the Panzer IV research group. This was produced at Vomag, the tank I'm modeling, and about the first 50 or so actually still had Panzer IV-G, or F2, because they're pretty much the same, drive sprockets and final drives on them. And this also has the short L46 gun, unlike the later H's, which of course had the longer gun. So let's open up the instructions. We start off with our rear deck, or sorry, front glacis and our rear deck. And the variant we're building here, the early one, actually had bolt-on armor. So the Panzer IV-H, they realized, you know, it needed to be up armored to be competitive and try to defend itself against some of the Allied anti-tank weaponry. So they had an extra bolt-on plate that brought the total front armor up to 80 millimeters. And you can see that both on the glacis and as well in a minute we'll see that on the upper glacis in front of the driver and radio operator. So moving over now, pretty standard two-part road wheels. These are the rubber return rollers you can see there. And the later H's, of course, had the steel rollers instead of the rubber ones. So this is another giveaway that it's a Panzer IV-H early. Moving on to, of course, our bogies. One-piece assemblies there. They're not the really intricate articulated ones that you can see in some kits, but that's fine. It's Tamiya or Tamiya. And yeah, good stuff. Now, this is the problem. This is the final drive off the normal H. And in fact, that is not what we want. We actually want an F2 or a G final drive, which doesn't have all these little bumps. It's just kind of a solid curve around the outside. So I did some research online. Apparently TriStar, when they were around, made a Panzer IV running gear kit that had all kinds of awesome little pieces, articulated bogies, and the final drives I need. The problem is TriStar is no longer in business, of course. They've been bought up by Hobby Boss, but Hobby Boss hasn't seen fit yet to re-release this particular Panzer IV running gear accessory set under their name. So found a couple on eBay with shipping and everything else. They're running about $50 Canadian. That's a lot to spend considering I just need 2 pieces, but at the end of the day, I guess if I go ahead and order it, I'll have all kinds of other awesome Panzer IV running gear bits and bobs. And I do love my Panzer IVs, so I'm sure I'll get some use out of them over the years. So we'll see how that unfolds when we come to the build. In the meantime, rear panel gets stuck on there. You can see here, so we've got the 2 different variants for the drive sprocket. We do want the early one. That's the one that's effectively the same as the F2 or the G. We don't want the one with the little spaces in between the spokes there. We've got the idler wheel and road wheels, pretty typical, separate hubcap there, which is fine. 2-part idler, and we're ready to put together the rest of the suspension. So pretty standard stuff. We've got our tow hooks that go in the back there. Very clean, of course. Tamiya is awesome with their instructions, and they're always very clear and relatively easy. Not as many parts usually as, say, a Dragon kit, but you know what, I'm liking it so far. We've got separate anti-skid surfaces there, it looks like, for the fenders, separate little fender spring. And now, we do have to drill some holes here, but we're not going to want to drill all of them, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Especially these 2, which it's flipped over, so this is actually the right mid side of the running boards there, and we do not want to drill those, and I'll explain why. You can see here we do have to cut off some bits as well, remove these little notches here because we're going to want to put on the side brackets for the Scherzen, so those apparently have to come off. So now if we go over to assembling kind of some of our accessories here, we've got our Bosch headlight. Of course, by this point they weren't using the No-Tech anymore. Very simple jack. It's not the big, 100-piece jack like you get with Dragon, but I'm okay with that, I guess, for now. I may have to scratch build some clamps there if they don't give us some separate clamps, but that's not a big deal. Our antenna casing and the brackets for that. Now, the Luftfilter, and the real name for this is just many syllables longer than that, but the last bit of that big giant long German word is Luftfilter, air filter. This was seen on obviously early H's, but in this case, this particular tank that we're going to model had actually been sent back for some refurbishment. I did seen combat elsewhere, don't know where, Italy, Eastern Front, something like that. And it had been refurbished, and Panzer Company Milka actually had been cobbled together from tanks that were at a driving school in Germany at the time that the Brits dropped around Arnhem. So it was hastily thrown together, thrown on trains, taken by rail as close to Arnhem as they could get, and then offloaded. So during that refurbishment, as they did later on with later models, the Luftfilter was taken off. And you'll see in one of the pics I'm going to put up here that they actually had some spare tracks running down the side of the hull where the Luftfilter used to be. So that's out. That's why we don't want to drill those 2 holes we just talked about. You can see now we've also got the up-armored glacis over the driver and radio operator's position there. We will use that because in the photos you can clearly see the bolts and all our standard sort of deck accessories, fire extinguisher, jack block, separate handles, which is nice, and our little armored cover there for the engine compartment. So all in all, looking pretty good. We've got our compartment here for our spare road wheels and transmission covers. We've got our tools, C-hooks in this case. Yeah, we've got our wire cutters. We've got our barrel cleaner. So it's looking pretty good. Separate little lock there for the spare road wheel case. So all in all, some pretty good detail. Now I have ordered an Edward photo etch kit to upgrade this, so that's on its way. Hopefully it'll be here soon, and of course all of this is subject to change depending on what Edward tells us to do in terms of not using the stock kit parts. So we'll carry on now. We'll go to the last page of this leaf here. And we're just putting on our shovels and everything. Again, the lift filter does not go on. What I'm not sure about is if this, and I'm assuming that's like a little manifold, whether or not that goes on and just simply doesn't connect up to the pipes. I'm going to have to look for some photos for that and maybe reach out to the research group for that. So there we go. We've got our separate jack clamps there. You can see the tools are all molded with molded on plastic clamps. They don't look like even the more sort of up-to-date Dragon kind of semi-detailed ones. Fingers crossed the Edward kit comes with some clamps, and Edward's pretty awesome, so I'm guessing they will, and I'll have to shave all these little molded clamps off, build, 20 or so little photo etch clamps and put them on. So now we've got our brackets and our shirts and rails going on. The tow rope is rope, it's string. I might be tempted to get a piece of copper wire, like speaker wire or something, and spool that up and try to make something a little more convincing. But we'll see how that goes. You can see there, the string goes on there. So, still have our turret and everything to build here. So upper hull goes on lower hull. We've got our tracks here, and these are the kind you can use secure with cement. So that's nice, we don't have to melt those together. One really nice thing about this kit is, and I think a few other Panzer IVs from Tamiya do this as well, they do give you some pretty good detail on the gun breech. It's a 2-part barrel, that's unfortunate, but a bit of putty and some sanding, we can make that okay. And you can see here we've got the basket and the whole breech block and the guardrail and everything there, so that's awesome. The inner part of the side doors, 2-part muzzle brake, don't like that either. Again, lots of sanding and a little harder to sand in there, in amongst those little baffles and whatnot than it is just to sand a barrel. So unhappy with that, but again, we'll make do. I might think about an aftermarket barrel, but we're on a budget and money is not coming out of our ears, as it were. So the cupola, we've got some clear parts. Gonna have to, I guess, do some masking and get those in there, paint them and so on. We have to shave off a couple little parts on the top, just a sort of a placeholder little commander seat. That's obviously not what a real Panzer IV commander seat looks like, but that's just so you can stand your figure on it. But you know what, with that nice breech and everything else, it gives you enough detail that if you could see down in the top hatch, or you wanted to model one of the side hatches open, you'd be okay and you could get away with it and just have that hint of detail inside the tank. So then we've got our rain gutter there and our 2 doors, separate little vision blocks, that's awesome. The MG34 ventilator, all in all looking pretty good. We've got our rails here. I'm imagining these are probably a little on the fat side for to scale because they're plastic. I did not order the aftermarket Schertzen kit, so these will be a bit chunky probably, but that's okay, it's not the end of the world. And finally, we got 2 commander figures, one in sort of Western Front, Italy, that kind of thing, and the other Eastern Front winter gear. That's fine, and then turret goes in and we're good. So, all in all, that looks like a pretty solid kit. Again, it's Tamiya, so I would imagine it's going to be pretty easy to put together, very well engineered. For marking options, we have a whole bunch. We have 20th Panzer Division Russia, Summer 43, so a nice tritonal from the Russian front. Of course, all the callouts are Tamiya paints. 2nd Panzer Division, 3rd Panzer Regiment Russia again. That's a 2-tone camo. And then we've got another Russian one. This is a winter one, looks like the winter whitewash. Of course, we've got the standing bear symbol of 4th Panzer Division there, autumn 43. And finally, 24th Panzer Division, 24th Panzer Regiment, Northern Italy. Anyway, lots of options there. That said, I will be using none of these because, again, we're going to be doing the Battle of Arnhem, and Panzer Company Milke did not have any markings on their tank other than, from what I've seen from photos, maybe a Balkenkreuz on the back of the tank. So other than that, no markings visible. And again, it wasn't part of an armored division, armored regiment. It was just cobbled together at a driving school. So that would make sense that there wouldn't be a lot of markings on it. So let's take a look at the sprues.